On paper, Russia and China look like the perfect team. Both against the West, both authoritarian giants. But the truth is their so-called no-limits friendship is falling apart. Russia, once a superpower, is now weakened by its disastrous war in Ukraine and a collapsing economy. And China, well, it's been watching, waiting, and now might be the perfect time to make its move. What if China decides to stop playing nice and goes for what it wants, by force? This isn't just a wild theory. Russia's military is stretched thin, and its resource-rich Far East is practically undefended. If China makes a move, it could trigger a massive conflict that shakes the world. In today's video, we dive into what might happen if China takes advantage of Russia's weakness, and why it's more possible than you think. Stay tuned because things could get interesting fast. But before exploring how a China-Russia conflict would play out today, we need to unpack China's strengths and weaknesses in relation to Russia's current state and capacity of resistance. This understanding is essential for grasping the potential dynamics of a confrontation between these two powers. So what does China have going for it in this conflict? Well, for the most part, it's a matter of what Russia has going against it. You see, the war in Ukraine has completely drained Russia's military resources, leaving its forces stretched thin and its capabilities severely diminished. There's also the fact that Russian troops don't want to fight anymore. Not in Ukraine, and certainly not against a formidable new enemy like China. And even if they wanted to fight, they'd be facing another serious problem. They don't have much to fight with. According to the General Staff of Ukraine's armed forces, Russia lost 8,768 tanks, 17,222 armored fighting vehicles, 25,023 vehicles and fuel tanks, 18,333 artillery systems, 1,195 multiple launch rocket systems, 949 air defense systems, 369 planes, 328 helicopters, 15,628 drones, 28 ships and boats, and 1 submarine. That's more than just a tally of equipment, it's a catastrophic collapse of military might. With such a staggering inventory of losses, the question looms large. How can a military expect to respond to threats, especially from a rising power like China, when it's been stripped of its most vital assets? The answer is simple: it can't, especially when the war in Ukraine has exposed the fact that the military that was once believed to be the second strongest in the world is nothing but a paper tiger. Essentially, Russia could only unleash hell on significantly weaker opponents. The Chechen separatists, the Georgian military, the Syrian rebel groups. But when facing off against a modern military force, Russia's carefully crafted facade crumbles to ashes. Even a small amount of NATO hardware sent to Ukraine was enough to expose the inadequacies of Russian equipment and the weaknesses within its ranks. Now, imagine the consequences of a full-scale confrontation with a powerhouse like China, a country that has been tirelessly working on modernizing the People's Liberation Army's capabilities in all domains of warfare, as the US Department of Defense puts it. On land, the People's Liberation Army, or PLA, continues to modernize its equipment and focus on combined arms and joint training, striving to become a world-class military. But even beyond military equipment, China has been working to create a young and tech-savvy army. To this end, the Chinese government implemented a revision to its military service law in 2023, aiming to recruit science and engineering students and train them for potential warfare. This revision also makes it easier to draft people in an emergency, bring troops who have left the service right back to their former units and tasks, and change the conscription process as the government pleases. In other words, China is laying the groundwork for a highly adaptable military force that is not only larger but also smarter and more capable of leveraging technology in any further conflict. But still, China isn't exactly struggling in the numbers department. According to the Global Firepower Index, China tops the list in the most relevant categories of military strength, boasting the largest active-duty military in the world. With over 2 million active-duty soldiers and a total availability pool of over 763 million, China wields a staggering advantage in human resources. This advantage pertains to virtually every country in the world, including Russia, which has effectively lost nearly all of its seasoned soldiers, the very ones who brought experience and tactical savvy to the battlefield. Of course, the land isn't the only theater where China has the upper hand. At sea, the People's Liberation Army Navy, PLAN, has managed to build the largest navy in the world, with an overall battle force exceeding 370 ships and submarines, including more than 140 major surface combatants. Plus, the PLAN is primarily composed of modern, multi-mission vessels, enhancing its ability to project power far beyond its shores. In 2022, the PLAN launched its third aircraft carrier, the CV-18 Fujian, with plans for a fourth already underway. Russia, on the other hand, has a sole aircraft carrier, which the British Telegraph refers to as the unfortunate Admiral Kuznetsov, and for a good reason. It's been out of service since 2018. So much for asserting naval dominance when your flagship is more of a floating relic than a combat-ready vessel. When it comes to the skies, many people would instinctively give the edge to the Russian Air Force, renowned for its legacy and formidable arsenal. However, this perception overlooks a crucial reality. While Russia may boast an impressive fleet of aircraft, its operational effectiveness is questionable, to say the least. All the proof you need lies in the fact that Ukraine, a country with a minuscule air force, has successfully prevented Russia from establishing air superiority for over 2.5 years. Now imagine how this force would fare in a conflict with the largest aviation force in the Indo-Pacific region, the People's Liberation Army Air Force, or PLAAF for short. In some regards, the PLAAF is even catching up to Western air forces, continually modernizing its fleet with domestically built aircraft and a diverse array of unmanned aerial vehicles, also known as UAVs. By now, it's abundantly clear that Russia would find itself vastly outmatched in a confrontation with China, which is now, without a doubt, the true second strongest military in the world. However, even though all of the PLA's efforts are directed towards strengthening the ability to fight and win wars against a strong enemy, there are a few aspects that are working against China in a potential conflict. Let's do a quick overview. Number 1, China has never fought in a modern war. While the country has contributed personnel to United Nations peacekeeping missions, around 50,000 in the past 31 years, it's unclear how its vast military machine would perform in high-stakes combat. Given both nations' similar love for over-exaggeration and propaganda, China could very well turn out to be Russia 2.0. All talk and no action. Number 2, the last war China did fight, the Sino-Vietnamese War in 1979, ended rather ignominiously for China. Sure, the country claimed victory, but in reality, it failed to achieve its strategic objectives of preventing Vietnam from ousting Pol Pot from Cambodia. So while Beijing might tout its military prowess, history has shown that when push comes to shove, China's ability to translate military might into tangible success is severely lacking. Severely lacking is also the perfect phrase to describe the training Chinese troops go through, which is disadvantage number 3 for China. This has been going on for so long that it became a precedent, with more commanders using troops for physical labor rather than combat training. Number 4, China's armed forces are also plagued by corruption, party favoritism, and poor pay, severely eroding the country's overall warfighting capabilities. But then again, do any of these factors truly matter if China is to face off against an opponent as beleaguered as Russia? Not really. At least not in any way that matters. Even with all these disadvantages, China would have the upper hand in a conflict against Russia. That much is as clear as day. But how would this conflict actually unfold? It's time to find out. There's no doubt whatsoever which Russian region China would attack first. The resource-rich Far East, Russia's easternmost part, which accounts for about 41% of the entire country's territory. It's also certain that China would initially meet little resistance. Simply put, Russia lacks the manpower and the equipment to wage war on 2 fronts at this moment. The ethnic minorities in the Far East have already been pulled from the region's defenses to Ukraine, leaving it vulnerable. That's why it's safe to assume that Russia would be unable to stop a total invasion of its easternmost region. Now let's hypothesize how this invasion would play out. With the success China has had at using disruptive cyber operations, it's safe to assume that the country's elite cyber units will be the first to launch a coordinated offensive, targeting Russia's already weakened infrastructure. In mere moments, Russia's Far East would be rendered nearly blind. Satellite communications, air defense networks, radar systems, they would all be swiftly disabled, plunging the Russian military into chaos. Since China is counting on the element of surprise, it would have to use this initial advantage to the fullest and wreak havoc on the region. So as the cyber offensive unfolds, waves of J-20 stealth fighters and H-6 strategic bombers would take to the skies, launching precision strikes against key military installations. Russian air bases in or near cities like Vladivostok and Khabarovsk would be targeted, crippling any remaining defense capabilities. Within hours, most of Russia's air defense systems in the region, including the S-400 mobile surface-to-air missile system deployed on combat duty in Nakodka, would be rendered inoperative, either through direct hits or jamming by China's electronic warfare units. Simultaneously, the sea would likely become a battleground. China would send out its Type 055 destroyers and Type 094 ballistic missile-capable submarines lurking in the Sea of Okhotsk to unleash YJ-12B supersonic anti-ship missiles against Russia's Pacific Fleet, stationed in Vladivostok. The primary target would likely be the flagship of the Pacific Fleet, the famed Varyag, but the overall goal would be to incapacitate or outright destroy most of the operational ships in the fleet. Given how badly the Black Sea Fleet has been embarrassed by Ukraine, a country with no navy, the Pacific Fleet wouldn't stand a chance against the onslaught of the biggest navy in the world. At this point, the PLA could safely launch a ground invasion. Up to 100,000 troops would surge across the border, heading for their first urban target, Vladivostok. This city, the second largest in the Far Eastern Federal District, lies only 28 miles from the China-Russia border, so the assault will be swift and decisive. Chinese forces would encircle the city, employing overwhelming firepower to take out any lingering Russian defenses. Within days, the city would fall into Chinese hands. This swift capture of Vladivostok would undoubtedly send shockwaves through the region, signaling that China's military ascendancy is no longer a distant possibility, but a stark reality. China could even take a page from Russia's book and frame this military intervention as a necessary step to protect the ethnic Chinese population in the region from oppression and discrimination. After all, Russia's Far East is densely populated with Chinese nationals, with some estimates placing their number at over 2 million. But regardless of the narrative the Chinese government opts for, one thing's for sure: after Vladivostok, the PLA would set its sights on Novosibirsk, the largest city in Siberia. And if you look at a map, you'll see that there's one country closer to Novosibirsk than China: Mongolia. In all likelihood, Mongolia would act as an unwitting avenue for Chinese forces to advance into Russia's vulnerable territories. Now, you might ask, why would Mongolia help China attack Russia? After all, didn't the country just carry out its first joint military exercise involving a foreign army ever, precisely with Russia? This exercise, dubbed Selenga 2024, took place in August of 24 and saw 700 servicemen and 200 pieces of military equipment, including MiG-29 and Su-25 warplanes, Mi-8 and Mi-24 helicopters, and multiple BM-21 Grad rocket launchers. Although Mongolia has historically maintained a delicate balance in its foreign relations, its economic dependence on China is simply too vast to ignore. As the largest trading partner, China wields considerable influence over Mongolia's economy, which heavily relies on exports of natural resources like coal and copper. In 2022 alone, China exported over $3 billion worth of goods to Mongolia. This dependence creates a scenario where Mongolia might feel pressured to align more closely with Chinese interests, especially in the context of a broader conflict. So at the very least, Mongolia would allow Chinese operations as they move towards Siberia. At first, it would directly support them through paramilitary forces. According to the Global Firepower Index, Mongolia boasts an impressive number of these forces for a country with a rather weak military, around 50,000. Historically, Russia has kept substantial forces in the border regions to prevent such attacks, but these forces are now all in Ukraine, or, let's face it, dead. Given that even Siberian homeless people were pushed to join the war in Ukraine, you can already assume that the PLA wouldn't encounter much resistance in this region either. So its ZTZ-99A main battle tanks, ZBD-04A infantry fighting vehicles, and PCL-09 self-propelled howitzers would simply roll through eastern Siberia. The PLA could also attempt to secure the use of Mongolian airspace or air bases in order to reduce travel time for missions in Siberia and beyond. But what about the Russian air defense systems? Could Chinese operations truly overcome these systems so easily? While Russia's air defense network has long been regarded as one of the most formidable in the world, its current state paints quite a different picture. Many of Russia's advanced S-300 and S-400 air defense systems have been redeployed to the Western Front, leaving Siberia and the Far East with only limited coverage. But even if they'd stayed put, they likely wouldn't pose much of a threat to China. Why? Well, because Ukrainian forces have managed to damage these systems with drones alone and absolutely obliterate them with ATACMS supersonic tactical ballistic missiles. China, of course, knows this and would likely use it to its advantage, deploying its own advanced drones and missile systems to target Russia's air defenses. Having successfully secured eastern Siberia's key urban centers, China would likely turn its attention to the next target, the Sakha Republic. Sakha is located in far northeastern Russia, or in northeastern Siberia to be precise. This Russian republic is home to some of the world's largest untapped oil and gas reserves, as well as vast mineral deposits, which makes it quite appealing to China. That's why the PLAAF would likely be deployed to secure the oil fields and gas pipelines with helicopters and drones. With Russia's non-existent ability to defend this region in mind, it would probably only take China a few weeks to secure control over 25% of Russia's Siberian oil production capacity. With much of Siberia and the Far East successfully invaded, China would have nothing left to do but start going deeper into Russian territory, pushing towards central Russia. Of course, the ultimate goal is seizing Moscow, the nerve center of Russia's military and political power, Russia's beating heart. But this is where China would face its greatest challenge. The mere possibility of Moscow falling would likely push Russia to use scorched earth tactics and destroy anything of value in its path to slow the Chinese advance. Infrastructure, supply lines, and strategic assets would all be sacrificed, leaving behind a desolate and inhospitable landscape. The Kremlin, knowing that the fall of Moscow would mean the fall of Russia itself, would likely reinforce its defenses with whatever remaining forces it could muster, turning central Russia into a battlefield of attrition. For China, the march to Moscow would no longer be swift or easy. It would be a brutal, grinding campaign through a country fighting for its very survival. China would have to overcome a mountain of challenges to get even remotely close to Moscow. First and foremost, Russia's capital is some 2,600 miles away from the Sakha Republic, making a ground invasion a logistical nightmare. Supply lines would be stretched thin as China is forced to navigate the vast, unforgiving landscapes of the region. Even with air superiority, sustaining such an operation would require an extraordinary level of planning, manpower, and resources. Plus, unlike Siberia and the Far East, Moscow is heavily guarded by Russian air defense systems. And we aren't even talking about the S-300 and S-400. The first special-purpose air and missile defense army, tasked to defend Moscow, received its first S-500 system back in 2021. The S-500 Prometheus is the latest surface-to-air missile system developed by Russia. According to Russian military officials, this system is capable of intercepting all types of modern hypersonic weapons at up to 370 miles and is reportedly already deployed around the Moscow Oblast. Of course, it's Russia making these claims, so we can never be truly sure about the actual effectiveness of the system. But what we can be certain of is that the Kremlin would stop at nothing to defend Moscow and the 13 million people living in the city. Now, you might ask, what if China's advance goes exceptionally well against all odds? What if the PLA leverages its overwhelming numbers to somehow seriously endanger Moscow? The answer is as chilling as it is definitive. The Kremlin would unleash the full fury of its nuclear arsenal. Putin would rather have parts of Russia turn to ash than witness Moscow surrender. That's why Russia's nuclear arsenal would come into play long before China could even reach the country's capital, let alone attempt to breach its defenses. Nuclear weaponry is really the only trump card Russia has left. Out of 12,121 nuclear warheads in the world, Russia owns 5,580. China, on the other hand, has 11 times less, around 500. But let's be honest, it doesn't matter how many nuclear warheads China has to respond. Once nuclear weapons enter the game, it's game over. And not just for China, for the entire world. That's why a dragged-out fight is a more plausible scenario for China than a suicide mission on Moscow. But what would be the potential outcomes of this dragged-out conflict? One outcome is fairly certain. China would dominate the Far East. After all, many experts believe that China has already invaded this region in a sense, with even Russian politicians referring to this region as Chinese. This conflict would only make this invasion official and solidify China's hold over the Far East. China would also likely establish military installations in the region to extend its influence into the Arctic Circle, an area of great importance to China since 2018, when the country proclaimed itself a near-Arctic state. However, China might also choose to withdraw from the occupied Russian territories at the demand of the UN or to address potential political instability and economic challenges at home. One of these potential challenges could be Taiwan. Amid the chaos in Russia, Taiwan might seize the opportunity to declare independence, capitalizing on China's diverted attention. Of course, this is only one of the possible scenarios in which the China-Russia conflict leads to global implications. The other two most likely scenarios involve an all-out war with several major players. Others either involve Russia's remaining allies, Belarus, Iran, and North Korea, or NATO. NATO's involvement could also have the same outcome as China's advance on Moscow, a nuclear apocalypse. This also means that any victory that China might claim over Russia would either be partial or outright Pyrrhic. But do you agree? Or do you have any scenario in mind in which China could completely conquer Russia without leveling the world? Let's also dial things back a little. Do you think China would even launch an attack against Russia, no matter how weak Russia gets? Sure, the two countries have a long list of contentious points, but China already gets everything it wants from Russia without the need to fire a single bullet. Share all your thoughts and opinions in the comments section below. Now go and check out Putin is Terrified as China Gains Ground in Siberia, or click this other video instead.